All right, good morning. How's everybody doing? Good. All right, I think we had a question. So, from the readings, you said,
Like, what was the actual outcome to Wilson sending the troops into Mexico?
all right, so when Wilson is in charge as president, he says that he wants to teach people how to elect good people. Which you can't even pull that off in the U.S. It's people elect who they want to elect. But he decides that the way he can do it is by going down and blockading Mexico so that we can force things to happen the way we think they should. He gets into a conflict in there, and the next thing you know, you have American troops who have invaded Mexico. At the end of the day, we kind of say, okay, World War I's getting ready to start. We're going to pull out. Mexico stays the same as it always was.
Okay, I was like, I don't really understand what the outcome of it all went.
Yeah, the outcome is we got in there, people got killed, and everything's the same at the end as it is at the beginning, except they're a little more ticked off at the U.S.
Okay.
So, all right, any other questions? All right, are you guys ready for the quiz? Go ahead and put your notes up, and we will get going. All right. So, why was the Spanish-American War fought?
The independence of Cuba. Well,
Okay, for the independence of Cuba. So, why does the U.S. get involved?
Because they supported Cuba and the Philippines.
Okay, so the Cubans are trying to get their independence, and the U.S. says, hey, Spain, you're not treating them well. We're going to fight on the side of the Cubans, right?
Yeah.
So now the U.S. is involved. What is the outcome? Who wins?
Cuba.
Okay. Yes, the U.S. wins,
Yeah.
but yeah, Cuba wins because when the U.S. wins,
Yeah.
they get their independence, right?
Yeah.
All right. So Cuba gets their independence. Is there anything else that changes?
America gets Puerto Rico and Guam.
Okay, we pay for Puerto Rico, Guam, and the Philippines. So yes, the U.S. expands its territory. Did they mean to expand their territory? No, they got into the war specifically to help Cuba, but at the end they're like, oh, we don't know what to do with this stuff, so yeah, we'll take it. All right, so we're going to dive backwards for a little bit because we're going to get into how we got Hawaii, but we haven't ever talked about how we got Alaska, right? Is that important? Do you guys care? Eh.
You can walk from Alaska to Russia.
Can you walk it?
In the winter, like when it's
Oh,
like,
okay.
away in the winter, then the ice is so like high
Yes.
that you can walk.
I was going to say you could probably swim, but yes, if you're walking on ice, you could probably do that. All right. So, speaking of Russia, in 1725, Russia claims ownership of Alaska. What gives them the ability to claim the ownership of Alaska?
They're right next to it.
Okay. And they had an explorer who came in and explored the coast of Alaska. And at that point, you say, yep, this is our countries, right? Is there anybody living in Alaska?
Yeah.
Yes. Did they vote to say, yes, we want to go, be part of Russia? No. They didn't have a say. The Russians just declared it. This is ours. The intriguing part to me is there's never more than 400 Russians living in Alaska. Now, if you have a concept of how big Alaska is, what does that mean?
There were not very many Russians there at all.
Yeah, I mean, we might have 400 people in this building right now, right? And so those are spread basically along the coast of Alaska because they didn't go way in. So does Russia really control Alaska? Not really. So in the 1850s, England and Russia get into a big fight over Crimea. Anybody know where Crimea is?
It's like north of Turkey. It's like by a little ocean in Russia.
Yeah, so you have the Black Sea, you have the Crimea. It's really close to where they're dealing with Ukraine right now, right? And so they are fighting over control of this sea that has access into the Mediterranean. England wins. This makes Russia really nervous. And they're afraid that England now will take Alaska. How is England going to take Alaska? Why would this be a fear?
Because they're not close to it.
Okay. Is there any English territory close to Alaska? This is a trick question. It is now not English, but it used to be.
Canada.
Canada. All of Canada belonged to England at that time. What is the longest border with Alaska? And the only land border with Alaska? Canada. So, do you see why the Russians might be a little concerned that England's just going to, roll over and say, hey, there's only 400 of you, we're taking this, it's ours. Does that make sense? So if you're afraid that the British are going to take it from you, what should you do? Is there any way you can get something out of it?
Like sign a treaty or something.
Okay.
Kind of.
So what do?
They offer to sell it.
All right, they offer to sell it to the U.S. Does this make sense to the Russians? Does this make sense to you for the Russians to do? I mean, if they're going to lose it anyway, why not get something out of it, right? So they offer it to the U.S., but they offer it in 1859. Is there anything on the U.S.'s mind in 1859 that might prevent them from worrying about Alaska?
Civil War.
Yeah. I mean, the Civil War is going to start in 2 years. So everybody is really at each other's throats. There's a lot of frustration, a lot of crisis. And people are like, you know what? We don't have time to deal with that. We're dealing with what we need to deal with. What happens right before the Civil War if the U.S. would take Alaska? Could it help cause the Civil War to come sooner? What is the Civil War? What is the final factor that causes the South to secede in the Civil War?
They can't make more slave states.
You can't make more slave states. And so you would have this huge, huge territory that now you're going to say, you can't put slaves here. And it probably would have caused the Civil War to come sooner. So everybody's like, nope, we don't want to deal with that. Now, once the war is over, then what happens?
They purchased it in 1867.
Yes. The U.S. says, all right, are you guys still interested? If you are, then we want to go ahead and buy it. So they do buy it. They buy it for $7.2 million, which is about 2 cents an acre. Now, was this a good decision or a bad decision? Some people said Seward, who was the Secretary of State, who made the decision, they're like, man, you're an idiot. This is Seward's folly. You spent a lot of money for nothing. What do you think? Is Alaska a good purchase?
Yes.
All right. All right. I'm getting really good response from one person. You guys have to wake up and do something for me, right? All right. So 2 cents an acre. What do we get for Alaska? What has Alaska ever done for us? Is there anything that we've gained?
Fishing.
Okay, fishing.
I've been there. I don't know. No. Well, water.
Okay. Yes, oil. So fishing, oil, gold. You had a big gold rush there. And it's kind of interesting. Where is it at compared to Alaska? Kristen, you threw this out there.
What?
Where is Alaska compared to Russia?
Where is it?
Yeah.
Next time.
Okay. So if I wanted to do intelligence, would that be a good place to put intelligence assets? I will just say, yes, we may have large intelligence assets in Alaska, right? So this really turns out to be a really, really good decision. It's the 4th time that the U.S. has bought land since we became a nation. The first is Louisiana. The second, after we defeat Mexico, is the Southwest. And then our worst decision, the Gadsden Purchase. We pay almost as much for the Gadsden Purchase as we do for the entire Southwest. And then Alaska. So the U.S. is growing. Why is it important that the U.S. grow? What makes people think that we should have more territory?
Do people think that?
Well, they did, yes. I think now we're kind of like, no, we're good. But at the time, we kept expanding. What's the U.S.? What kind of government does the U.S. have?
Democracy.
Okay, it's a democratic republic, right? And so, going back to last class, you have the progressives. What did the progressives think? What was their goal?
Were they the ones that wanted the middle class or no poor people?
Yes. So they have done better in their lives, and they're like, you know what? We should let everyone else have the same things we have, right? So do you think a democratic republic is a good type of government? Yes. I mean, because you guys get a say in how things work, right? So they said, you know what? Everyone should have a democratic republic government. And so the bigger that the nation gets, the more people have this government. And so they're like, yes, we want to expand. We want to make sure that everybody has this opportunity because we are doing things right, and this is how people should be governed. So this is the mindset. Now, I will say Hawaii is kind of a step backwards. We blew it. All right? So in 1795, the Hawaiian Kingdom is founded. Now, what happens in 1776 that you...
Declared independence.
Okay, the U.S. declares independence, right? And like 1783, the U.S. becomes the country that we know it as. So this is about 12 years later, right? They form a kingdom, and it's almost as old as the U.S. So they're doing well. Everything's moving. In the 1820s, the U.S. sends missionaries, or missionaries go from the U.S. to Hawaii to help them become Christians. As they are talking to the people, they talk about what our government is like. There are British people who are talking to them about what the British government is like. And the king says, you know what? That's actually a better system than our system. So we will establish the same kind of thing. We will have the king, we will have the legislature, and we will have the judicial, which is sort of like the British government, right? And so now the people have more of a say. They are more bought into the government. And so everybody's kind of happy with this. In 1887, a lot of people start moving to Hawaii because there's land they can purchase and they can build plantations, and it'll be sugar plantations. And then you sell the sugar to the U.S. and you make lots and lots of money, right? So once they are in, they see this new legislature, the new judicial system, and it takes care of the poor people, it takes care of the regular people better than it takes care of the rich people. So after a little bit, they're like, you know what, we're not happy with this. We want to have the power, we want to have the authority. So they roll into the king and they say, we are the militia. We are going to come in and we want you to change the government. We have a constitution, and this constitution is going to give landowners the authority. Now, how do you think the king feels about this? Not good. He's like, no, we have a good system. The system's working. Let's not do this. And at this point, they pull out bayonets and they say, do you want to sign the Constitution or do you want to die? Now, if you're given that opportunity, which do you think you're going to do?
Sign.
Yeah, he signs the Constitution. So they call this the Bayonet Constitution because he did not sign it. The people of Hawaii did not say, yes, we want this. They were forced into this system. Now, one other way that we can tell that this was forced upon them is in 1889, so 2 years later, another guy, Robert Wilcox, comes in and he's like, you know what, this is not right. What we're going to do is I'm going to overthrow this new bayonet constitution government, and I'm going to go back to the king and the legislature and judicial, and we will go ahead and have a system for the people. He is not successful. He is stopped, he is arrested, and he's put on trial. He's on trial for treason, right? If you're a Hawaiian citizen, would you convict Robert Wilcox of treason? Okay, I got a couple of no's. Why?
He was fighting to bring the government back to what it was.
All right, he's wanting to restore power to the people. And that's what the people said. They declare him innocent of treason because they're like, nope, the guys who are in power, they committed treason. Robert Wilcox is just trying to bring things back to the way they were, where the people have authority and the people have power. So the next couple of years pass. In 1891, the king actually travels to San Francisco. While he is in San Francisco, he dies. Nothing bad happens. He's older. He's not in good health, so he dies, right? The U.S. is in a really bad position now because we're like, hey, your king's dead, and we'll ship him back to you. Sorry, right? So at this point, Liliuokalani is the sister, and so she says, all right, I am now the queen. She immediately says, I will not, I am not abiding by this constitution. I am not abiding by the bayonet constitution. So they roll back in, and under threat, they make her sign the constitution. Now it's kind of interesting here because she signs the constitution and they walk away, and then she says, look at the signature on the Constitution. That's my English name. It's not my Hawaiian name. And because it's my English name, it is not representative of the Queen. When I am Queen, I use my Hawaiian name. So therefore, that Constitution is void. Now, does that seem like a good decision? I mean, kind of immediately, yeah, it sounds like she really was smart. Except they actually bring in U.S. Marines and they overthrow her government completely, and they set up a new government. So in 1893, she is overthrown, she is tossed to the side, and guys like Sanford Dole take over the government and say, now we are the leaders of the government. Once they become the leaders of the government, they say, we want to be part of the U.S. Now, this seems a little weird, right? Because they have power, they have control. Why would they want to be part of the U.S.?
Because their government is kind of a wreck and they want stability.
Okay, so one, how strong is the Hawaiian military? If the Germans, if the British, if someone else rolls in, the Hawaiian military is not that strong, right? So you want someone to protect you. But the other reason is the U.S. have just put tariffs on sugar and pineapple and other things. If you're outside of the U.S. and you're trying to sell to the U.S., you lose a lot of money because you have to pay these tariffs. But if you're part of the U.S., you don't pay the tariff, right? So they said, we want to be part of the U.S., we want you to annex us. Cleveland looks into it and says, wait a minute, U.S. Marines overthrew the Queen, and now there are people in charge that are not Hawaiian, that are not supposed to be there? No, we're not going to do this. Now, he doesn't go as far as putting the Queen back into power and reestablishing the original government, but he says, we're not going to have a part of the U.S. where people are forced to have a government that they didn't want. So this stands for a little bit, but by 1898, we're in the Spanish-American War. In the Spanish-American War, there's a lot of ships that are trying to fight over in the Philippines and in various parts of the Pacific. How are ships fueled at this point? Coal. Pretty close. So, do you want to just put loads and loads and loads of coal on your ship? So what do you need to do?
You need to have a place where they can dock.
Okay, you need a place where they can stop, put new coal on, and get ready to go again. Anybody know where Hawaii is?
Middle of the Pacific Ocean.
It is almost exactly, I mean, that's not true. It's about a third of the way across the Pacific Ocean. So it's in a really good position. The U.S. can stop, take care of things, and then move on, right? And so in 1898, McKinley, during the Spanish-American War, says, all right, let's go ahead and annex Hawaii. To annex Hawaii, you have to have a treaty. A treaty requires 2/3 of the Senate to approve it. 2/3 of the Senate will not agree to annex Hawaii because they're like, nope, this was done badly. You guys are doing this illegally. So McKinley says, you know what? It's okay. What we'll do is we'll have a joint resolution of Congress. So just like we've seen other times when the U.S. government wants to do something, it's like, okay, this may be wrong, but we're going to do it, and who's going to call us out on it? And so they have over 50% of the House approves, over 50% of the Senate approves, and they're like, yes, we're good, we don't need anything else. And so they go ahead and bring Hawaii into the U.S. So is everybody in Hawaii super happy to be part of the U.S.? No. And this is where I will tell my sad little story about being in Hawaii. When my wife and I were traveling back from Japan, we'd lived in Japan for 3 years with the military. They said, hey, you can stop in Hawaii and take a couple of weeks off. Okay, that sounds really good, right? So while we're there, I'm a historian. So what do historians want to do? They want to see historical things. And so Queen Liliuokalani's palace is open to the public. You can go and you can tour the palace and be like, hey, this is really cool. I drive up to the area and all there is paid parking. I don't know why. I had no money, right? I had no change. Probably because I was going through the airports and I didn't, you don't want to carry change and metal. So I'm like, okay, I need to go ahead and park. So I kind of stand near my car and I went up to 3 or 4 different people and I'm like, hey, I need some change for my car. Could I just give you $1 and get change? And they actually cussed me out. And they're like, get out of here. Okay. So I go to the next person. I'm like, hey, I'll give you $5 for $1 and change. And they cussed me out and they're like, get out of here. And I'm like, wow, okay. I don't know what to do now. I went ahead and left my car. I went in because I thought, you know what? I'll see if I can get change there. As I walk in, the lady at the front desk is like, oh, hey, sir, how are you doing? You might want to leave. There's an anti-American rally happening here in about 30 minutes, and this is probably not where you want to be. I was like, oh, okay. Thank you. I'll go. And I went back and moved my car. But there's a lot of people that are still angry over the way that the Hawaii was annexed. And so you will see anti-American rallies in an American state. All right, so we kind of talked about the Spanish-American War. I want to give you a background on the Spanish-American War. So Alfred Thayer Mahan is a naval officer. The main thing you want to learn from this is he wrote this book, The Influence of Sea Power on History. The U.S., again, the progressives see, I am doing better, I need to help other people do better, right? So if you want to help other people, the way to do that is by being strong and powerful. Think Teddy Roosevelt, right? I can help others when I am strong and powerful. And so the U.S. sees that they have an opportunity to become a world power and that they can influence the entire world to be more democratic, to be more of a representative government. And so Mahan says world powers are created by strong navies. He does a very bad history because he picks and chooses which thing he looks at to prove his case, which really frustrates me because it's like, oh, and the Romans defeated their enemies because they had a navy. And it's like, okay, well, possibly, but they also had a huge army, and they also had, at least for a while, a fairly representative government. So, you know, there are various reasons that they could have done it. But if you think that world powers are created by strong navies, and the U.S. should become a world power because we want to help other parts of the world get better, then what does the U.S. need?
A strong navy.
All right, the U.S. needs a strong navy. So, who becomes president? Well, at this point, it's still McKinley. McKinley goes ahead and grabs Hawaii. He builds the navy. But this is the first opportunity that the U.S. sees to expand their influence and to help other people. So, in the 1500s, who controls almost all of the Americas in the 1500s? Spain. In the 1500s,
1500, yeah.
Spain controls almost all of North America, almost all of South America except the part they are sharing with Portugal, and all of Central America, right? So North America changes, but Central and South America are controlled almost completely by Spain. So in 1808, Napoleon invades Spain. Again, why do we care about European history?
Because it's important.
Because, okay, yes, it's important in itself, but it also, for this class, influences what happens here, right? So Napoleon invades Spain. All of the countries in the Americas see that and go, huh, if Spain is fighting everything they can to protect their country from Napoleon and just not be part of France, then do I have a shot at declaring my independence and winning? Yes. So almost all of Central and South America declares their independence and fights off Spain because Spain is more focused on surviving than it is keeping their colonies. However, Cuba and Puerto Rico decide, no, we're not going to do that. Over time, they're like, wait a minute, everybody else has their independence, but not us. So they start looking for opportunities to gain their independence. And in 1868, Spain has a revolution. Again, what's Spain going to focus on? Surviving, yeah. So it's focused on its own country. Is this a good time for a colony to rebel?
Yes.
Yes. And so, yes, there you go. Cuba revolts, and it is in revolution for 10 years. So Spain is fighting its own revolution, plus they're fighting Cuba. It is a lot. So finally, Spain turns to Cuba and they're like, hey, you guys just want autonomy. You want the ability to kind of run your own government. And so what we'll do is we'll offer you autonomy and we'll offer you representation as part of Spain. So you'll still be part of Spain, but you'll be a representative part. You won't be a colony anymore. Does this seem reasonable? Yeah, I mean, realistically, if your choice is lots more people die, or hey, I can be part of Spain, I can have the autonomy for my own government, but I also get represented in Spain, everything seems reasonable. So they go ahead, they agree, except once Spain gets control of things again, they're like, okay, yeah, whatever. And so again, Cuba is stuck being a colony. They don't have representation. So in 1895, they're like, all right, we're done. We are not playing anymore. You made us a deal, but you didn't hold through on the deal. We are going to fight you. This time, who is Spain fighting?
America.
Well, nobody yet.
Oh.
Yeah. So now Spain puts their whole army into fighting Cuba. And they are crushing them. There's an insurgency. Why do people fight insurgencies? Anybody know?
The other army's more like better funded and bigger.
Okay, because if the other army is going to defeat you every time, then over time you're like, okay, I don't want to just have all of my people killed all the time. So you start an insurgency and you kind of hide. You go out and attack when you think you can do damage, and then you hide again, right? So is there a good way to beat down an insurgency? The only way is to force everyone into like, okay, you're not going to come out after 9 p.m. You're going to have to do these things. So the Spanish come up with large plots of land, and they put fences around them, and they herd everybody into those areas and say, you have to live here. If you are bad, then we're not putting you in here. But if anybody is outside of this area, then obviously you're part of the insurgency. Now, let's consider this from your perspective. Oklahoma and Texas get into a war because, it's Oklahoma and Texas. So that makes sense, right? Texas is beating Oklahoma. And Oklahoma has an insurgency where we are fighting against Texas, but we're sneaking out, we're attacking, and then we're hiding again. Right? Texas now says everybody in northeast Oklahoma has to move to Tulsa and live in Tulsa. Now, are you guys good with that? No, why not?
I don't want to live in Tulsa.
Okay. Yeah, we didn't choose to live in Tulsa, so that's one reason. Does anybody have a job?
Yes.
Is it in Tulsa?
No. Wait, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
Oh, no.
So what happens to your job if everybody moves to Tulsa?
You don't have that job anymore.
You lose your job, right? Does everybody own a home in Tulsa? No. So what happens if everyone is forced to move to Tulsa? Do the Tulsans say, oh, you know what? I feel bad for you guys. Why don't you guys live with us? There might be a few, but probably not that many, right? So where are you going to live? On the streets. And nobody likes that, right? So you're living on the streets, you lost your job, so how are you going to eat? hopefully somebody will give you some food because you don't have money, because you don't have a job, and you're living on the street.
Rob somebody.
Yeah. Are you happy with this situation? No. And the Cubans are really, really angry because they're like, no, this isn't right. And you push too many people and there's not enough food and there's not enough to go around and take care of people. So everybody is losing that's there, right? So the U.S. sees this and the U.S. says, hey, Spain, stop it. This is not right. You're treating people badly, and we're not going to accept this. Now, if you're Spain, do you care about the U.S.? We're kind of growing into a world power, so what do you think? Is this something they need to be worried about? Probably. So Spain actually sends back word to their ambassador, and they say, hey, is McKinley really going to attack us? And the ambassador, named Delhomme, writes back and he goes, you know what? Don't worry. McKinley is a big wimp. He's a loser. There is no way that McKinley will do anything. Someone finds a copy of this letter and they publish it. Now, if you're McKinley, what do you have to do? Okay, if you're McKinley, you're like, I can't not do anything now because they say I'm weak, so I have to do something. So McKinley sends the USS Maine, a big naval ship, into the Havana harbor just to make the point, hey, the U.S. is here, we're watching what you're doing, so you better start acting in appropriate ways, right? While that is in the harbor, the ship blows up. We have looked at it now. Realistically, something inside the ship blew up. And we don't know if there was fuel, we don't know if there was ammunition, but something inside the ship blew up and caused the ship to sink. But if you were in the U.S., and you just had Spain write a letter that said your president is a weak little loser and he can't do anything, and you send a ship into the Havana harbor, what do you think when that ship blows up?
They attacked it.
You think that the Cubans attacked the ship. So April 20th, Congress says, you know what? We support Cuban independence. Spain, you need to leave, or we will go to war with you. Spain decides, nope, we're not leaving. And so the U.S. declares war, but they put on a Teller Amendment to the declaration of war that says, we are not trying to take Cuba, we're not trying to take over the world, we're just helping a smaller country to gain their independence. So, once the war starts, the U.S. defeats Spain in 114 days. Anybody know how long Russia has been fighting with Ukraine now?
Almost a year.
Yeah, I mean, it's been longer than 4 months, right? And Russia is like right next to Ukraine, but they've been fighting a while. This happens really quickly. One, because Cuba is a lot closer to the U.S. than it is to Spain, right? So we can get guys there quickly, and there's a lot of guys who are ticked off because the journalists are like, hey, you need to go address this. So they roll in, they volunteer, and they fight. The other piece is in the Pacific Fleet is protecting the Philippines. The Philippines, when they find out that the U.S. has declared war, they're like, hey, we want our independence. They start fighting with the Spanish. So the Spanish Navy is in the Pacific. They don't know that the U.S. has declared war. They just know they're fighting in the Philippines. Long story short, the U.S. Navy comes up, surrounds them and says, we will sink you unless you surrender. They're not prepared to fight the U.S., so they go ahead and surrender. And then we roll up into the Philippines and we say, okay, the Spanish have a fort. The Filipinos are actually attacking the land side of the fort when the U.S. comes in. So the U.S. rolls into port and the Spanish are like, hey, we surrender, thank you, you have it, we're getting on our boats. And so as the U.S. comes in, the Filipinos are shooting at the U.S. And we're like, whoa, why are you guys doing this? And they said, because we're fighting the Spanish. And we said, well, we're not the Spanish, we're the Americans. And so we put up our flag and the Filipinos stop fighting with us, right? Because they're like, great, all we wanted was our independence. The U.S. will give us our independence just like they gave it to the Cubans. Everybody's happy, except once the U.S. kind of looks around, the German fleet is sitting there. And as soon as we leave, we believe that the Germans are going to go in and take over the Philippines. So we're concerned. The Filipino government right now, the Philippines are like hundreds of islands that are all just little bitty islands. Every single one of the little islands has its own group of people, and at this point they did not consider themselves like to be a national group. It's a bunch of islands with each having their own government. They wanted their independence, but they weren't able to protect themselves. They weren't able to ensure that they would stay a government. So the U.S. said, you know what? We will stick around. We will help you learn how to have a good government. Now, from the U.S.'s perspective, if you're a progressive, are we doing a good thing? Yeah, we're trying to help them to have a democratic republic where they can run their own government and everybody is represented. But from the Filipino perspective, what did you just hear? We're taking over. We will tell you when you can be independent. And how is that different from what the Spanish told them? It's not. So what do you think that the Filipinos do?
They said they're not doing this.
Yeah, they said, I'm not doing this. We'll fight the U.S. So at the end of the war, the U.S. pays $20 million. They gain Puerto Rico, they gain Philippines and Guam. And we say, we're going to give the Filipinos their independence later. The problem is, all the insurgents who had been fighting Spain now attack the U.S.
Indonesia.
Yeah. Yeah. Very similar, right? I want my independence. Give it to me now. So, the Filipinos are now fighting the U.S. They fight a conventional war for about 10 months. Who's going to win a conventional war between the Filipinos and the U.S.? Like big army slamming into big army. U.S., absolutely, right? There's no way the Filipinos can win this. So if you know you can't win a big army versus big army, what do you move back to? Yes, you move back to an insurgency, right? And so now they are hiding in the jungle, and when they get an opportunity, they will attack the U.S. What happened in Vietnam when the U.S. is attacked over and over by people that they think they're protecting? Over time, you start thinking, all these people are trying to kill me, so I'm going to kill them, right? And so the U.S. Army engages in the same kind of brutality that the Filipinos are. and both sides start torturing the others. Both sides start killing people that may or may not be war fighters. So it really gets ugly. Finally, the U.S. comes to their senses and they're like, wait a minute. We're fighting people that we were trying to give them their independence. Why are we fighting with these people? This is stupid. So they go back to the Filipinos and they say, all right, you know what? We told you that we wanted you to have your independence. What we'll do is we will give you your independence in this small area and we'll help you build it. And as soon as you prove to us that you're able to control this area, we'll expand the area until you control all of the Philippines. Now, the Filipinos are like, okay, we see forward movement now. We see that there is a plan for us to become independent. So yes, rather than us dying and dying and dying, let's go ahead and do this. So they go ahead, the U.S. has the Hearts and Minds campaign, and the Filipinos start controlling parts of their own government. Back in the U.S., both parties use this fight against each other. When they are going into elections, they're like, hey, the Democrats are like, hey, the Republicans got us into this war with the Philippines, and they're doing horrible, atrocious things. And the Republicans are like, hey, you know, we're trying to do the right thing, and we just need a little more time. So now we look, Japan and China had a big war. Japan wins, and they completely destroy the Chinese Navy. Once you don't have a Navy, what does that mean for everyone else in the world? Yeah, you're easy pickings. So now everybody rolls in and they start taking chunks of China. The U.S. comes in and says, wait a minute, everybody needs the opportunity to trade with China, but let's not take little chunks of China and everyone control those chunks, which basically is colonialism. Let's figure out how to do this where everybody can trade with anybody. Now, England agrees with this, and England has the biggest navy in the world, right? If you are any other country in the world, do you want to fight with England and the U.S. together? No, that's just stupid. So everybody's like, okay, you know what? You're right. We'll go ahead and we'll just have this open door. Everybody gets to trade with China. Everybody gets to do what they want to in China, but we won't control our own specific spheres. Now, the other piece, and I'm bouncing from place to place, but there's a whole lot happens during this 12 years. So I wanted to kind of make sure that we're up. So we grabbed Alaska, we grabbed Hawaii, we have saved Cuba and they are now independent. We have Puerto Rico, Guam, and the Philippines. But California is a big deal now, right? So in the 1840s, you have gold in California, correct? All right, so if I am in Virginia and I want to get to California, what is the easiest way to get there? Highway 66, right? No. Highway 66 isn't built yet. Oklahoma is still Native American territory, and so if you come across the U.S., it will take you months and people shoot at you. So the easiest way in the 1840s to get across the U.S. is actually going all the way around South America and then up to California. That is a long time, right? So some of the people realize, you look at a map and you go, you know what? Nicaragua has this big lake here. we could just go across, or we could just go across in Panama. And so then they start, ships will come down and they stop in either Panama or stop in Nicaragua. You walk across Panama or Nicaragua, and then you get on a ship on the Pacific side, and it cuts your trip by about 2/3. So pretty good deal, right? Well, if you know that you can cut your trip, then what's the next step? What do you think we could do so that a ship can go straight through?
Build the canal.
Yeah, you build a canal. And if you build this canal, then the canal doesn't have to be that long as compared to, you know, coming through here somewhere, and you can just roll through. France has already started working on the canal. France has run out of money and things are not looking good. So England and the US make a deal and they talk to France and they say, look, we will purchase all the stuff that you have done. Now, what's the other thing that you have to get approval? Who owns that property?
Panama.
Okay, at this point, the Colombians own this whole territory, but yeah, the people who live in Panama. So you're like, all right, now we have to figure out, how do we get this? We go to the Colombians, and by the way, it's Teddy Roosevelt, and he says, look, we want to create a canal across the Panama Isthmus. We will pay you $10 million plus $250,000 a year to use this canal. Is that a reasonable offer? I mean, yeah, it's a pretty reasonable offer. Colombia is like, you know what? We can make a load of money. So they come back and they go, how about 25 million plus 250,000 a year? Now, Teddy Roosevelt's president. How do you think Teddy Roosevelt responds to someone not just doubling the cost, but like 2.5 times the cost? Is he a really, really good, what's it called?
Negotiators.
Well, he is a good negotiator, yes. But he doesn't take defeat well, right? So what do you think he's going to do? He gets angry. While he is angry, the people of Panama come to the U.S. and they say, you know what? We want our independence. If you help us get our independence, we will take your original deal. What do you think Roosevelt's going to do? Yes. Roosevelt says, you know what? Yes, let's do that. So he brings the Navy down here in between, next to Panama and Colombia. And the Panamanians declare their independence, and the U.S. says, we support Panamanian independence. Colombia, you better not mess with them, because you saw what we just did to Spain when Spain refused to give Cuba their independence, right? So, Panama is independent. We go ahead and we pay them the money. We start building the canal. The interesting piece of this is when we start building, Congress has to approve a treaty, right? Has Congress approved a treaty saying that we will build the Panama Canal? Is it legal for us to build the Panama Canal without a congressional treaty? No. In fact, Teddy Roosevelt goes to his legal advisor and he says, I need you to come up with a way that we can show this is legal. And his legal advisor looks at him and says, President Roosevelt, please do not ever use the word legal and Panama Canal in the same sentence. If you want to do it, but don't try to make it look legal. Just make it happen. And so they do. They build a canal, and in 1903, the Senate finally approves because we're already building it, right? So we might as well go. Then the weird part is, in 1921, after Roosevelt and Taft are gone, Wilson's in office. He feels really guilty. He feels like the U.S. cheated Colombia. And so Congress and Wilson pay Colombia $25 million for the Panama Canal. So what did the Panama Canal wind up costing us? $35 million. So yeah, instead of Roosevelt getting it cheaper, now the U.S. government, like it always does, finds a way to throw money away, and we pay both the Panamanians and we pay the Colombians. So, all right, let's go back to the Pacific. In 1904, Russia and Japan get into a war. They are fighting over control of Manchuria up here and Korea. So in the war, Japan rolls in and just starts kicking Russia's tail. Russia is really frustrated. They're like, well, that's only because those are the guys over in the West. If we had the guys in the East fighting, then we would take you. So they bring their navy all the way from Europe, all the way around into the Pacific. And as they are coming up the Pacific, the Japanese Navy meets them and sinks all of them. So at this point, Russia is totally embarrassed. The Japanese are dominant. Roosevelt rolls in and says, you know what? I'll help negotiate the treaty. He earns the Nobel Peace Prize, which I find really amusing. What do we know Roosevelt for, Teddy Roosevelt? Speak softly and carry a big stick. And he gets the Nobel Peace Prize, right? I just find that amusing. So Japan controls Korea, they control Manchuria, and this is kind of the beginnings of World War II, if you think about it. And then Roosevelt shows he wants to prove that the U.S. is strong, so he creates the Great White Fleet, and before he leaves office, he sends it around the world. Taft really doesn't do a whole lot foreign policy-wise, so we're going to roll into Wilson. Wilson, his goal, he is a progressive, right? So if I have good stuff, what do I need to do with it?
Expand it.
I need to expand it. I need to help other people have it. So Roosevelt says, I'm going to teach the South American republics to elect good men. He wants to spread democracy. He wants to promote peace around the world. He wants to teach other nations how to be better. And in his mind, better means
Democracy.
like the U.S., right? All right. So there's a really good opportunity for him to show that he's doing the right thing. Mexico has been in revolution for over a decade. And so they keep overthrowing the government and putting a new government in. They overthrow that government, put a new government in, overthrow that government. And so he's like, you know what? I'm going to show them that they need to elect good people. So you have Diaz overthrown, Madero is overthrown, Huerta is overthrown, Huerta overthrows Madero. Long story short, Wilson is like, okay, stop. You guys need to have elections. I don't want you in power because you have the strongest army. I want you in power because you were elected. Now, if you're Huerta and you are the leader of Mexico, how important is it what Wilson thinks about you? Yeah, it's like, okay, whatever. You run your country, I'll run my country. why don't you sit down and go away, right? So it completely ignores him. Now, there's another revolution, and they are trying to overthrow Huerta. So Wilson says, if I can stop weapons from coming into Mexico, then I can prevent Huerta from protecting himself. The revolutionaries will overthrow him, and I will convince them to have elections. See how brilliant this is? So the U.S. Navy is ordered to embargo all weapons coming into Mexico from Europe. And everything is kind of sitting there. He puts ships on the East Coast, and over time, you have these Navy guys, and they're going into port, and they're doing stuff. They're Navy guys, so, you never know what they're going to do, right? So these Navy guys roll in, and I'm not trying to be offensive, trying to be funny, and nobody laughed at that, so, all right. Anyway, Navy guys roll into port. For some reason, they're arrested. And as soon as they're arrested and the Mexican government realizes it, they're like, oh, this is a really bad decision. They grab them, they pull them out of jail, they walk them to the port. They're like, hey, we're really sorry. They pat them on the butt, and they're like, go back on your ship. We love you. No problem, no harm, no foul, right? Except that the admiral in the port is like, no, you arrested U.S. citizens. Now you have to apologize. In fact, what you have to do is you have to salute the U.S. flag. Let's go back to the Oklahoma-Texas fight, right? Texas rolls in, we arrest some Texans in Oklahoma, and then we say, hey, you know what? It's fine. Go back to Texas. And Texas, the governor says, you know what? No. In Oklahoma City, at the Capitol, I expect you to play the Texas state anthem. What do you guys think? Is that reasonable?
A little demeaning.
Yeah, it's a lot demeaning, right? I mean, I wouldn't do it. Like, no. We brought them back to you. Everything's good. No, we're just going to do this and everything's fine. It goes up to Wilson, and Wilson supports the demand, and he's like, no, I want to have this, 21 gun salute. The Mexicans go, look, we will do a salute to the U.S. and the Mexican flags together. I think that's a pretty reasonable compromise. No. Wilson's like, nope, to the U.S. flag only. So at this point, everybody's getting angry. Everybody's getting frustrated. The Germans have a ship that has weapons and ammo, and they slip in while the U.S. is arguing with the Mexicans, and they deliver their weapons, they deliver their ammunition, and they get out. And the U.S. is furious, and they're like, no. And so can they go back and get the weapons off the ship? Too late, right? So where is the weapons? Where are the ammunition? In Mexico. So they go seize the custom house, impound the cargo. And at this point, that is an invasion of Mexico, right? And so now there's a big battle. The U.S. occupies Veracruz for 6 months. And Wilson's shocked. He's like, whoa, I didn't mean to do this. It does strengthen the Republic. They overthrow Huerta. And so now Carranza is in control. Wilson goes to Carranza and says, do elections. And what do you think Carranza says? Mind your own business. Not our issue. So again, people are fighting. This is when Pancho Villa decides, hey, I want to get the U.S. involved again. If I can, then that helps. He goes ahead and attacks some U.S. engineers. Wilson says, okay, that's bad, don't do that. But he doesn't do anything. So Pancho Villa is like, how do I get the U.S. involved in this war? So he invades Columbus, New Mexico, and kills people on U.S. soil. Can Wilson ignore this? No. So he sends 11,000 soldiers. They come down to capture Pancho Villa. Realistically, if you're Mexican, are you going to help the American soldiers or are you going to help Pancho Villa? Pancho Villa. Everybody loves Pancho Villa. They're like, yeah. So the soldiers roll in. They're like, hey, where's Pancho Villa? I don't know. Right? And so we stay there until 1917. Why would we leave in 1917?
That's when we entered World War I.
World War I starts, and we're like, okay, we don't have time for this anymore. We have to fight World War I. So Pancho Villa remains in control until 20, when Carranza is overthrown. The next guy goes, look, why don't you retire, and we'll give you a farm and a ranch. And it's like, okay, yeah, that's fine. So how successful is Wilson in helping everyone learn to have good leaders in the way the U.S. wants?
Not.
All right. He does the same thing in Nicaragua, Haiti, Dominican Republic, and Cuba. And so he is all over the map trying to force people to pick the right people. Long story short, all he does is tick everyone off, and no one has people that are pro-American when they're done. All right. So how does Hawaii become a U.S. territory?
Use of Pearl Harbor.
Okay. So we have guys who roll in, take over the government, and say they want to be part of the U.S. First we say no, but then in the Spanish-American War we were like, yep, okay, we'll do that. All right. Why is the Spanish-American War fought? In one word?
America supports
Cuba.
Cubans and Filipino.
Say it again.
America supports Cubans and Filipino against Spanish rule.
Okay. The Americans support Cuban independence and Filipino independence, and so we fight Spain. What's the outcome?
They get independence.
Okay, the U.S. wins, Cuba gets independence, and sadly, we are not willing to give the Filipinos independence immediately, so they start fighting us. All right, how's the U.S. gain control of the Panama Canal?
Of course.
Paid Colombia $10 million
Okay,
and supported the Panama.
Colombia doesn't take our offer of $10 million, so we support Panamanian independence, and we give them the money, and then we pay Colombia as well. And then Wilson directs troops into Mexico because he was trying to force them to learn to elect good leaders. Is this successful?
No.
No. All right. So sadly, you guys only get to see me once this week. And so these are the questions for next class period.